Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Center for a New American Security in Washington, D.C. at the conclusion of a fantastic event. Part of this think tank series on super soldiers concluded today, something led by Paul Scharre, who heads the Technology and National Security Program here at CNAS, and Keith Maxwell, who is with Lockheed Martin, the program manager of the Onyx system, the exoskeleton, which is just awesome. Keith, you got the best pants in Washington today by an order of magnitude. It's totally outstanding, and congratulations on the Popular Science Award for greatest military technology, as well as a $7 million contract. Christmas came early for you guys.
It did. It did. We're very excited about it.
So, Paul, let me come to you and talk to you about the Super Soldiers series. You've been working this for many years. Decorated soldier, you were Special Operations Reconnaissance Team Leader, Third Rangers. You were also a 75th Ranger training and everything else. Iraq and Afghanistan deployments. Keith, you're also a highly experienced operator in your right. Talk to us a little bit about augmentation, the technology, the soldier of the future, because there are two parts of this that you guys made clear in the event. One is on the operational side, making soldiers increase their endurance, increasing their ability to lift and to move, but also not to injure themselves, because there isn't a soldier I don't know, especially in the combat arms, who doesn't come away with some form of disability at the end of the day. In fact, I mean,
I'm one of them. Yeah.
You're exactly. That's what we were talking about, and you had to have surgery in order to repair something that was a service-related injury. Talk to us about the findings of the series and some of the concrete recommendations you're making to the department, which is already thinking about this topic, in part because you were in the department forcing them to think about this issue.
Yeah, we're wrapping up today the culmination of our Super Soldier series, 7 reports that look at ways to improve individual warfighter survivability. And we've looked at a range of different technologies and policy solutions, exoskeletons, robot teammates, human enhancement, ways to lighten the load of what people are already carrying today. You know, what's really motivating this, Vago, is we're in a place today where infantry, a very small percentage of our force, less than 4% of the military, disproportionately suffers the casualties in U.S. conflicts. Over 80% of U.S. casualties since World War II have been in the infantry. So how do we change this paradigm? How do we leverage technology to better protect individual warfighters right out there on the front lines? Load is part of it. We've added all sorts of new whiz-bang technologies, things like body armor, night vision, better optics on your rifle. These things make people more effective, but they also add weight. Body armor alone, despite really important efforts the Army has done to trim the weight of armor, it still accounts for over half of the recommended 50-pound fighting load that people carry. So they're carrying a heck of a lot more than that today. And it slows people down. I kid you not, I did a mission in Afghanistan. We carried 160 pounds up a mountain one time. We didn't go very far. And that decrease in mobility then comes at a price. Our troops are getting outmaneuvered by the enemy. The enemy is initiating attacks. It's very vulnerable. And that's not an isolated incident. We look at the average load the soldiers and Marines are carrying overseas in current wars, 117 to 119 pounds. So that's just incredible, and that's not sustainable. So there are lots of ways to deal with this. One is offloading weight to robotic teammates. There's a lot of opportunity there. Another one is exoskeletons. We're very excited to bring in an exoskeleton prototype today that Keith was able to demonstrate at this event here at CNAS to let people see that this is actually real technology today. It's matured a lot in the past couple of years, and we're in the place now where the Army's looking at the system and taking it out and doing some testing to develop it further.
And it's extraordinary technology, which is going to change warfare, but it's also going to change society, whether for wounded warriors or even older folks who want to be able to maintain their mobility. And you were mentioned some great applications in terms of even on construction and manufacturing. Keith, walk us through this rig. I mean, I remember writing about this more than 20 years ago, and the whole thing was power density, right? How can you power it? They were big and they were bulky and they may have looked cool. I'm not going to mention the comic book hero that everybody's been invoking today because this is very very, very different from that at the end of the day. Walk us through this iteration of the suit, because its capabilities are extraordinary. This is a 2-year-old rig. It's been operating with zero defect for 2 days, 2 years. Talk to us a little bit about the architecture and how all of this magic happens, because you showed some pretty cool dance moves out there during the presentation. I hope we can find the video and show that. But you know, you've got full mobility with it. Talk to us a little bit about how you guys made this magic happen.
So this whole program began about 10 years ago. We began with a system we called Hulk. And it was, as you described, a big, bulky system, 85 pounds. It required 6 batteries. It lasted for a few hours. And it was never going to get us where we needed to be. 10 years of development later, new partnerships. We're now working with a company in Canada called Botemia. We licensed the base technology for this system, the Onyx, from them, and then we've been developing steadily, just trying to make it ready for soldiers over that time. Today, you're looking at a system that weighs 19.5 pounds. It will get lighter as we go through a weight reduction type effort. It may gain some pounds back after we're done because we're going to ruggedize it. We want it to be ready for soldier use. We understand the environment. We've been there. We do that. So that's kind of where we're going with the technology itself. How do we make guys go further, farther, faster? How do we do that? And right now we believe the Onyx is the answer.
And walk us through, so power-wise, it's, you know, talk to us about the endurance. You guys use standard batteries, which is a good thing. And so walk us through the power, the endurance, and also how the system works, because you have extremely powerful electromechanical motors, but also an extremely sophisticated sensor system, but in a very elegant package.
Well, thanks on the compliment, but the system itself now will get more streamlined. That's the objective. Get it as tight and conformal to the body as possible. That improves its efficiency on the body, and that's the way we get even better performance out of it. In terms of the structure of the system, this system is built around these 2 actuators at the knee. Literally what that's doing is providing a substitute for my muscles. So as I'm climbing stairs, as I'm going up mountains, as I'm in a low crawl, if I'm going through a culvert or a subterranean tunnel and I'm in a crouch, all those things that burn up my quads, all those things that just eat soldiers up, particularly with load, those things go away because the system is literally providing me the power that allows me to do that as though I was just walking.
And so it's 8 hours on 2 batteries?
8 hours on 2 batteries, up to 16 hours on 4 batteries, and that's constant utility. That's constant motion. So
with load? With
load. So that's a constant activity. With just a small battery on here, I'm operating all day. I'm not doing anything that labor intensive, and again, that's one of those things. I don't want the system to be consuming energy when it doesn't have to. I want it to be providing me with support when I ask for it.
You used a great analogy that at first you put it on, you said it was sort of like having an animal on you or something like that.
It did. It felt a lot like having a live animal. If you had ever ridden a horse before, you understand what that's like to kind of be steering something else that's outside of you. Over time, it becomes literally a part of me. I don't think about it anymore. I simply walk, I simply squat, I simply do all the things that I would normally do in my daily life, and the machine moves with me. And what I realize over time is it's providing me with all this additional energy, all this additional augmentation, that it just becomes a natural extension of my body.
And give us that analogy you gave where there were a bunch of soldiers who were using it and what they were able to do with and without the suit in terms of doing those lifts at the end of the day.
Sure. Kind of a remarkable event. I'm at AP Hill there in Virginia, and we're with a group of operators, and these guys from early in the morning until late in the afternoon are going through their daily drill. We got the early precursor of this suit on a bunch of the guys. At the end of the day, after marching for miles, running up and down 5 floors of a building, going through those subterranean tunnels, all that kind of stuff, the beginning of the morning, the guy does 26 repetitions without the system with a 185-pound load, 26 squats. At the end of the day, after having done all that different activity with the system, he does 72. So right there, it tells you everything you need to know about what the system is doing. Not only am I better performing, but I have so much more energy at the end of the day than I started with. So I'm in a better place.
And also the manhole cover lifting, right?
Oh, extraordinary. So normally that's a two-man lift. It's 350, 400-pound manhole, and the guys are going down in the hole. One guy goes over there, he's wearing his kit, puts the key in, pulls the hole right off the cover right off the hole. Down the guys go in their full mop kit. That ability to take, one more guy away from doing the lift and keeping him on security where he's got a rifle in his hands, it may be the difference between observing a threat or not. And that's keeping guys alive. That's
Exactly, and you're lifting with your legs, so that's which is a key part of it. Let me go, Paul, to you in terms of sort of the future of warfare, right? I mean, that's something that you focus on, and you've been looking at this. So the first thing is, this, even in this iteration, is game-changing because now it has useful battery life, right? Standard batteries so that you can easily recharge them and use them in the field for what would be sort of a typical day, and carry some more batteries, and you solve the challenge for even having greater coverage. What are the next phases of this? I know there are parts of this that are highly classified in terms of the kind of armoring and integration and other things that can happen with the system. But talk to us about how you foresee this as a combat informant, as a special operator who is out there and done the job. What are sort of the next iterations that you see being fielded rapidly, because troops are engaged in contact right now, doing missions all over the world where that endurance, the speed, and the strength is going to be something that's going to be vital and make the difference?
One of the things we found in this Super Soldiers project is that there are a lot of technologies where making investments are going to pay off 15, 20 years down the road. We got to make big investments. But there are also things like this exoskeleton that are viable today that we sort of put in the hands of people on the ground and then start to have a meaningful impact. Not just exoskeletons, but also things like robotic teammates that could carry your gear. Small drones that can go inside buildings, navigate on their own, map out buildings, so we don't have to have a team rushing through the fatal funnel themselves. Things like human performance enhancement technology that exist, that are real, both cognitive and physical performance enhancement, that are opportunities for us to grab a hold of. I mean, all of this stuff adds up. All of this stuff gets to a place where we can get a meaningful advantage on our adversaries and start to tilt this balance, make sure that when our troops are on the front lines engaged in firefights, they're the ones that are winning those fights and are coming home safe.
There was a Army special operator, a dear friend of mine, and we were talking about, lightweight equipment, and he said, 500 pounds of lightweight equipment is still 500 pounds of lightweight equipment. You can saw your handle off the toothbrush. At the end of the day, if you have enough crap, it's still heavy. How are you applying your warrior acumen to this, you and your team, to make sure that you're tailoring this in the right way for it to be adaptable, flexible? You got soldiers of all sizes. You guys want to get rid of the Allen keys, for example, that go with this. Walk us through how that experience is shaping it, and what sort of Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4, because Lockheed doesn't do anything that's just Gen 1.
No. So basically, when you look at this, and we talk a little bit about the toolless future of the system, we don't want soldiers carrying additional tools, right? They've got enough tools for their rifle. They don't need any more than that. And so we want to take that out of the equation, make it very, very simple for them to resize, give to the next guy, be able to use across the spectrum of the soldiers. When I don't have it, you can use it. So that's kind of important, but we also need to ruggedize this thing. We need to get it to the point where we can immerse it in water. We put it in all the different environments in which soldiers can expect to operate. Shock, vibration, water immersion, saturation, salt spray, all those different things that soldiers are exposed to, the systems have to operate in, and they can't fail. So the one thing we know is failure's not an option on these equipment.
And you'll have to change the color, because that is actually Lockheed blue.
It is Lockheed blue, but I can guarantee you we do have multicam, and it will be on the systems that go up to the 10th mountain.
Yeah, but it's quite fetching, unless you want to be screaming "Go Navy" all the time. I mean, that could be go Navy. Exactly. Game is coming up. Although I think Army is going to feel pretty confident this year, but I digress. Paul, what's the state of the art of this technology in other nations around the world? Sam Bendet, who's a frequent guest on our website of Center for Naval Analyses, had talked a little bit about the Russians and how fast they've been moving in this space, almost getting close to fielding and in combat in Syria, their version of the exoskeleton. Walk us through what the state of the art of this technology is around the world.
Yeah, the Russians have fielded, as Sam had mentioned, an exoskeleton prototype. I think what's worth keeping in mind is that a lot of the underlying enablers of this come out of advanced computer processing power, robotics that are widely distributed around the world. They are widely available. The U.S. is not the only country that has access to the underlying technology here. There's some really impressive engineering that goes behind this, but those kind of advanced chips and processing power, anybody else can get a hold of that. And so we're going to have to live with a world where our major nation-state competitors, like Russia, like China, eventually going to be able to build this kind of technology. The real trick here is moving faster. How do we operate in a world where this technology is so available? We've got to be able to move faster, advance prototypes, do testing, do evaluation, and then spin this into our force very quickly. We can't be building things on 20 or 30-year timelines. It's going to be too late. And so we've got to make sure that we get this stuff out to the field quickly.
Let me ask you an upper body question, because I know that it came up. So it's a two-part question. One is an upper body question, and then the other one is the ankles. You left the ankles unsupported for the moment in order to be able to give you that ease of mobility. Foot plates can get very complicated, and you talked about the importance of gait. Talk to us about the upper body portion of this. And then also there is a feature you can put on this that actually will dramatically increase your load carrying capability, but not actually change how you walk.
Right. So we've already got a prototype of the system that drives the load to the ground. So here the waist would be solid instead of flexible, and that would go into a spine, and that spine would support the load of the rock, goes down into the hip, goes down the architecture of the legs, goes to the ground, right? The load is supported. That's a pretty simple solution. We've done it before. We've got prototypes of it now. This is really about driving out fatigue. It's not necessarily about transporting more load to ground. So we're not even encouraging people to take more load to ground. Really, the reason why that's so important is, think about it this way. If a soldier cannot carry it without the system, what happens in that event that the system is shot up? What happens when it's broken and it's no longer there? That load can't be distributed across the soldiers any longer. It's just too much. So we want to keep it in the domain of human-capable technology. That's really the important thing, and we hope that the Army is hearing what we say when we say that. You had a second part to that question.
Upper body.
Upper body. So the upper body part, we have prototypes of upper body technologies. Mostly it's about pick and place. Pick things up, heavy things, and carry them. We're not looking at that in terms of this round, mostly because they're so energy intensive. I mean, we have so many different, range of motion in the leg. The upper body is many, many more joints, and you've got to augment all of them in order to make that work. So it's an energy hog at the moment, and the technology is just not there to support it.
And what's it feel like when it's turned off to walk? Because it would look like it's well distributed, isn't it?
I just turned it off, and it feels like walking in water.
And it doesn't even feel like a burden?
No, not a real burden at all.
Let me carry off on something that Keith said in the demonstration. You started it off by making a human growth, that if you wanted to turn us into sort of meat monsters, you could do that with bovine hormones, for example, but that's not what we're doing as the United States. We're doing this through mechanical augmentation and a man-machine interface. There is a concern, Paul, and I know that because you and I have talked about it, and I know you've researched this, that our adversaries may not be as squeamish, for example. I mean, there's the recent medical experiment that a Chinese scientist just unveiled, which has many geneticists and other scientists alarmed, even in China, for basically creating life through an altered gene, human life in an altered gene form. What are the ways that we need to think about this as a nation that's ethical? We have done some of our own augmentation work, but that's more been through, drugs that give you added strength and endurance. But then we've also, special operators are familiar with the downsides of that as well, which can be bad. And so we've always sought greater physical fitness, in systems like this. Talk to us about some of the ethical, intellectual, and operational challenges we may face in a space where we have adversaries that are not as constrained morally as we are.
Well, I want to, I guess, first correct a misperception, which is that we're not doing human performance enhancement in the United States military. That's not true. We use widely without the force one of the most widely used human performance enhancing drugs on the planet, which is caffeine. It increases cognitive performance. It fights fatigue. We use it widely in the military. We've got chow holes overseas, stocked full of ripets. And then we got things like GNCs on military bases, right? Where service members are going and they're buying products and they're pumping it full of their body. All of that in an unregulated fashion. That is probably today the worst possible way to approach this technology, because we're using this stuff in a way that's not regulated by a medical professional. We're not thinking about side effects and balancing risk. We now have sleep problems across the force for a variety of reasons, but caffeine is probably a contributor to that. And in particular, there are newer technologies that are better. Army tests, Army research has shown modafinil, a fatigue-fighting agent, can keep people up for 40 hours at a time without any degradation in performance and with fewer side effects than caffeine. And less risk of being habit-forming than dextroamphetamine that's been used in the past. So there is stuff that's out there that's real, that's relatively low risk. These are things that we actually should be looking at this technology, evaluating it, and where it makes sense, where the benefits outweigh the risks or trade-offs, incorporating it into our force. There are pockets of this going on inside the U.S. military. There's good research going on at different labs, but there's no cohesive plan, and that's a real problem because this stuff is not science fiction. There's a lot of technologies, both on the physical and cognitive side, and we talk about this in our report, that are real today and that are being used in other settings, in commercial settings, in personal applications, that we want to find ways to capitalize on this. A lot of the ethical concerns that you see in other areas, like in sports, for example, about fairness, those don't apply in the military context. Getting an unfair advantage is the whole point. That's why we try to field our people with better equipment, better training. We want to make them better prepared for combat. We want to get an unfair advantage on the enemy. We need to think about safety. That's an important factor. For experimental techniques, we want to make sure that any use of service members is voluntary, that they're not coerced. So there are important ethical issues we've got to grapple with, but the right way forward is for the DoD to take a look at this and to start deal with these issues and open a comprehensive human performance enhancement program to start to deal with those.
But from a genetic engineering standpoint, I think that was, a friend of mine who was studying this for somebody very senior in the government. When we were talking about man-machine interface, his thing was, there are countries that are not encumbered by, he joked, fusing a USB chip to the base of your skull to be able to do that, right? That's a little bit more of what folks are a little bit concerned about is whether it's China, perhaps even Russia, would have a willingness to do some human engineering things that we may not be comfortable with. Based on your research, is that a genuine fear or something that you think is just an overblown fear?
No, I think it's absolutely valid that there are going to be other places. I mean, we just saw this Chinese researcher claiming to have edited genomes of babies, growing new genetically engineered babies modified with CRISPR-Cas9. So I think that's a valid fear. Certainly we see other countries using doping in sports systematically as a country. If they're going to do it in sports, they're certainly going to do it in military applications. So I think we do need to be cognizant of that. And just because someone else is doing it doesn't mean it's the right idea. Maybe we don't need to follow suit in that application. But there are a lot of things that are nearer term today that are real, that are safe, where the use benefits do outweigh the risks. And those are things we need to take a hard look at.
Let me, Keith, bring you into this to sort of wrap it up. Price point for the system, I know that this is a prototype, but if this is something that's going to get in widespread service, what's the ballpark price that you guys are shooting for? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands? Somebody said millions, which I don't think was quite right.
Tens of thousands.
And how soon will it be before we start to see this actually in civilian application far more broadly? Because it's right around the corner, isn't it? Both for elder purposes, but and there's a wounded warrior question I also want to ask.
So yeah, in terms of when will you see this in the industrial domain, the 28th of January, we have our kickoff of our roundtable of industry partners, major aerospace and automotive players, all coming up with the requirements for what they want these systems to do, hosted by Lockheed Martin.
And so it's a couple of years away. I mean, it's not that far in the future where you'll be able to maybe acquire one of these for your own personal mobility augmentation or industrial or other.
Right, exactly, a year to 2 years.
Wow, extraordinary. Paul and Keith, the greatest thing about military medicine, the sad thing about war is it advances the state of play of military medicine, and military medicine has gotten to an extraordinary point, and the casualties that we've taken, the fatality counts would be a lot higher if it wasn't for the extraordinary golden hour rule that we've put. And the great thing is people are staying alive. The downside is that oftentimes they're staying alive at the expense of one or more of their limbs. There's a friend of mine who did a study a couple of years ago for the Secretary of Defense's office, which was, you know, you can be a double amputee and still have an enormous amount of mobility, but your energy consumption is so high that after the age of 50, it starts to become harder and harder for you to have that mobility. Talk to us about the application of systems like this, both for, you know, the rehabilitation element of it, which I think is a little bit of a genesis, so I want you to talk a little bit about that, but also the moral imperative for the nation to try to help those who've given and made that sacrifice to be able to return some kind of mobility and flexibility in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're in a place today where advances in body armor and medical care have meant that we're having troops survive injuries that would have killed them in previous conflicts. I mean, we see this from the data from these wars. The great thing is we're able to save people's lives. The downside is we now have people living with really awful injuries that affect many aspects of their lives. But the technology is advancing, and a lot of it is able to allow people to regain mobility, amputees, double amputees, and there's been sort of spin-off applications of military inventions then helping other people with disabilities. There's a company that's got an ankle exoskeleton, a passive one, that came out of military research on prosthetics and is now widely available on the civilian market. So there are a lot of places where this investment has been able to do good for veterans and many other people as well.
Keith, talk to us a little bit about that.
So the folks down there in San Antonio at the Center for the Intrepid, they're doing some spectacular work, literally, in trying to get guys rehabilitated and giving them the best equipment in order to do it. What we're trying to do is provide some additional assistance. We've got a partner company there in Canada, Patemia. They're building a product called Kyogo, and that is all about rehabilitation and assistance once you've got the osteoarthritis, the other physical injuries, the muscular injuries, some of the illnesses that cause a loss of motor control. So we're able to use this type of technology there to give, you know, soldiers after their tour duty, after their enlistment, the opportunity to still be, you know, standing upright. And there's nothing like being able to stand upright and walk around, meet people eye to eye, and that makes a big difference.
Keith Webster, Program Manager of the Onyx system. Absolutely extraordinary. Congratulations on the Popular Science Award and the Army Contract Award. Congratulations. And it's just simply extraordinary. Like I said, you're the man who's got the coolest pants in Washington or anywhere else that you're going. Paul Scharre, Head of the Technology and National Security Program here at CNAS. Thanks very much. Thanks both for your service, and thanks very much for your great work. And folks can still get your book, Army of None.
Yes, Army of None, Autonomous Weapons in the Future of War. It's available everywhere where books are out. And many credits to Jennifer for the title.
That's right. Our old producer, Jennifer Leo Prohori, who did a tremendous job for us, came up with the name. We were here for an interview, I think, with you, and you asked, hey, what would be a good name for it? And she blurted out Army of None, and it worked.
It's a winner. Yeah, you know, when you see success, you got to go with it. So all credit to Jennifer on the recommendation of the title. The publisher loved it, and it's doing well.
It's doing well, and get it for Christmas, guys. Thanks very much again. Outstanding technology, and something obviously the DoD has got to work on. Before I go, Secretary Mattis already has convened a panel, hasn't he, to look at some of these issues, actually?
That's right. Secretary Mattis's Close Combat Lethality Task Force is focused on this very issue of saving service members' lives of those who are out in close combat operations. And I can assure you they're well aware of the findings in our study.
Guys, thanks very much again.
Thank you.